All right, so uh, can we just start off with an introduction? I know you're an attorney. Like, what kind of law you practice? Who you are.
Yeah, I'm, I'm in my mid 50s. I'm 54. I'm from New Jersey, but I spent many decades in California before going up to law school at Northwestern School of Law in Portland, Oregon. I went off to Cambridge for a year and studied environmental law. Came back and passed the Washington bar in 1996. I've been practicing law in Washington for 20 years. Pretty much, if you go onto the WSBA.org website, you can see my specialties. I have many specialties in the sense that I try to handle what the people of Washington bring to me. So whether it's a criminal defense, personal injury, an estate planning matter, Social Security disability advocacy, state regulatory practice, banking problems, foreclosure defense. I pretty much practice in a wide area to serve the people of my adopted state of Washington. I'm a member of both the Washington State Bar Association and the United States District Court for the Western District of Washington, which pretty much covers going north from Portland, basically Vancouver, Olympia, Tacoma, and Seattle. So I travel that I-5 corridor a lot between both state and federal courts on the west side of the Cascades in Washington State. I have 6 post-secondary degrees. I earned a BA in history from UCLA in 1984. That was publicly conferred, but I also completed 36 quarter units and was granted a BS in advanced mathematics from the Naval Postgraduate School at UCLA. There's a branch of it there at UCLA, but that was conferred secretly. That's something you might actually want to write an article about it. There's been a program at UCLA since World War II that essentially prepares civilians to be called up as naval officers in the event that they need to call people up in the event of, for example, World War. So I completed that, but that degree is not something that the registrar at UCLA confirms. It was conferred by the Naval Postgraduate School, and they won't even talk to anybody about who attended their different programs at UCLA. So anyway, I was pretty much focusing on my history studies. I wrote for the Daily Bruin. I became a journalist in Los Angeles, wrote for different periodicals. I worked with Norman Cousins for a while in Los Angeles at UCLA. I wrote for the Cousteau Society as a young environmental journalist, then went off to Portland to study environmental law. And then after I got my law degree, I earned 2 advanced degrees in environmental law and planning. One earned with distinction at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and then a Master of Philosophy at the University of Cambridge. So, I'm an educated person. I've been practicing law for 20 years at the state and federal level. And around 2000, maybe after I've been practicing law for 4 or 5 years, I look back and I examined the fact that in childhood, growing up in New Jersey, I had been involved in some very unusual activities that related to my father's work. My father was a Defense Department engineer. He was officially employed by the Ralph M. Parsons Company of New York and then of Pasadena, California. Unofficially, he had worked on secret aerospace projects for the U.S. government from the time that the Ramjet was being built at Curtiss Wright in 1952 to 55, all the way through his retirement in 1984. Sometime in the mid-1960s, my father was brought into a U.S. time-space program that was being organized under DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. They were essentially creating an intelligence funnel and putting all information that they could glean from ancient sources, extraterrestrial sources, contemporary foreign sources like the Nazi German and the Soviet Russian experiments with time travel, and the works of brilliant people like Nikola Tesla. And they were trying to derive a capability within the U.S. government to gather intelligence about past and future events and conditions, and individuals for that matter, utilizing either sending somebody to the past or future physically or modeling holograms of past and future events. That project became known as Project Pegasus. I was brought into it unofficially in the winter of 1968 as a first grader, growing up in New Jersey. When my father and I teleported from the old Curtiss Wright Aeronautical Company facility, where he had worked on the Ramjet project in the early 50s, to the New Mexico State Capitol grounds in several seconds. So my point here is that when I was brought into Pegasus, initially at age 6.5, but then officially at age 8 in the beginning of my third grade school year, when I was September born, so I entered third grade at age 7 and quickly became age 8. I was brought into a classified defense project, and I retained my memories of what happened in that project. Around 2000, I began to examine what had happened, primarily to write a book about my experiences and try to get it placed as a feature film, basically sell film rights. But what ended up evolving was a secondary career as a lawyer, where I became associated with the revelation publicly of the true history of time travel within the U.S. government. And so I've been doing that since, publicly, my first talk was in October of 2004. So 12 years ago, after investigating what happened to me for 3 or 4 years, I then began speaking publicly. I began appearing on radio in 2009, television in 2010. And I've done about, this is just an estimate, but it's a fair estimate, I've done probably about 10 national and local TV shows and about 100 radio and podcasts, everything from podcasts that 100 people have been listening to, all the way through 8 appearances on Coast to Coast AM, which is one of the largest radio shows in the world. And I've done about 25 public talks that will last either the better part of a day or actually all weekend, where I share my experiences with the public. I'm talking about 2 actual defense projects, and I have done my research. I've done 3 major fact-finding trips to New Mexico. I've done a fact-finding trip to New Jersey. I've gotten confirmations of the existence of the program by 12 different Americans whose stories I will be telling in my book. I spoke with some of the kids that I was in my immediate training group with in New Jersey, who remembered a device called the Montauk chair being present in our learning lab at my public elementary school in Jersey. So I really spent, thousands of dollars and thousands of hours going back and reality testing my memories. I was a member of the bar, and I have basically an ongoing abiding duty to police not just my conduct as an attorney, not just the decisions I make, but my mental state, my physical state, to see if I can give my clients zealous advocacy. So I was under an abiding ethical duty to evaluate whether my memories were true. And after several years of investigating, I ruled out every other possibility, mind control, fantasy, delusion, mistake, influence from the mass media, and so forth, every other possibility. So I haven't published my book yet, but I basically have it blocked out. It's going to be coming out when I finish it. But along the way, I became a public figure. And I'm an intelligent public figure. I'm a past member of Mensa, highly educated, and I'm a serious person. I haven't been, manipulating or deceiving the public. I'm a serious person bringing serious information to the American people. For example, if we had implemented the Tesla teleportation technology that Project Pegasus researched and developed based on paperwork that actually began in Colorado Springs, Colorado in 1899, when Tesla began working on teleportation. Said experimentation, which my father repeated upon the request of the government when he was employed at the Thomas A. Edison Research Lab in West Orange, New Jersey from 1956 to 64. That's how my dad got pulled from more conventional, secret aerospace projects like high-performance jet aircraft into the emerging time-space program, getting people from point A to point B, not in a jet aircraft, but by traveling through time and space. And so, I lost my train of thought here, but basically, I realized
that's totally
that,
fine. I will get into several different things here.
So that's basically my story. Basically, what's of significance to the public is that I'm a whistleblower. I'm a highly educated whistleblower. I'm professionally successful. I'm stable. I've been practicing law for 20 years without a without a client complaint even. And and I investigated what happened to me, and I became a public figure by being essentially the whistleblower that ended government secrecy in the United States around time travel. So that's essentially my life story. I not only helped pioneer time travel as one of the 140 child participants in Project Pegasus, but I then brought the information forward, first as a whistleblower waging a truth campaign, and now as a candidate for the presidency. So that's my basic life story, and um, that's why my 100 proposals may seem somewhat eclectic. Admittedly, I'm entering the presidential race from an unconventional background. A lawyer who time traveled in childhood, was involved in the Second Defense Project during his college years. And I've become essentially sort of a whistleblower entertainer in a sense, a kind of a lecture giver. In other words, I've been primarily utilizing the tradition of storytelling to inform the American people of the great technical accomplishments that we ourselves made, our common culture achieved, but which were kept secret because they were weaponized by the Defense Department. And that led me into politics.
Okay.
The process of
that's great.
becoming a whistleblower.
I mean, as far as an introduction, that's awesome. And you actually answered a couple questions I had in there. So, I mean, I don't want to sound curt, but I'm actually, or I've gone through your 100 proposals, and I've got about 25 questions, and we'll hit everything from time travel and UFOs to or defense and less sexy things like FOIA requests. If that's okay with you.
Sure, fire away.
So
I'll try to answer more shortly. Since you have 25 questions, I'll try to be more curt myself, more brief in my response.
By all means, but I might cut you off. But hey, listen, I love Coast to Coast, so I understand the format.
Yeah. And that's the emerging culture. I mean, I just mentioned with Dr. Brooks Agnew, and his conception is, we have a culture, we have an establishment, and we all identify with it one way or the other. It's politics, it's science, it's religion, it's academia. But there is a para-establishment that's emerging in that States. Brooks estimates that 65 to 70% of the adult American population essentially belongs to that sort of that intellectual movement that's starting around non-ordinary material. It's a large group, but it's been described as the cultural creative niche of about 40 to 50 million Americans and Canadians. But Brooks conceives of it as a para-establishment where, for example, if you approach people on the street in New York City, about 2 people out of 3 would know what chemtrails were and have something passively intelligent to say about them. That's what's happening in our country. Our country is bifurcating between an establishment that lies to everybody and a resurgent American sort of renaissance, an intellectual renaissance or movement that is trying to find out the truth about the reality that we live in. And I'm part of that movement. I'm part of that renaissance.
Okay, so, well, in that case, let's first off, let's address, I took no offense in your message, but I do want to find out exactly what you may have taken issue with, because I want to make sure that none of my other questions are off base.
Actually, it's not germane to your work, but it's really germane. My response to that question is really germane to what's going on in our presidential election process. I drafted a fully cognized set of 100 proposals that were well crafted, that indicated where I would try to take the country as president. The mainstream candidates simply have not done that. Let's just take Trump, Clinton, Cruz, and Sanders, for example. Okay? If you were just to isolate one issue, I mean, I have six or seven fully cognized proposals, I think it's 7, that relate to the broad question of extraterrestrial life. I have the one about the disclosure of ET life, the one about disclosure of hidden technologies, the one about disclosing our time travel arsenal, and then the ones about the moon, the lunar program, Mars, and then the secret space projects and secret treaties, and also the FOIA one, which would relate to that. So when you did your article, the concept of your article was, who is the most UFO friendly? I would say ET friendly. Who is the most ET disclosure friendly of the candidates? And instead of legitimately covering my elaborate plan that I'm presenting to the American people of what I would do to bring about ET disclosure, or whatever you want to call it, the truth about UFOs, I was dismissed in the same way as I was in the Huffington Post as a joke. And you didn't tell the truth about what my campaign embodies. You used me as a foil, as a joke at the end of the article. And in fact, since you were taking the front runners, and then you took Ed Baker and I as independent, I don't really know who Ed Baker is, if that's in fact his name, I forget but the other guy that you mentioned at the bottom of the article. You put a cartoon of an octopus, and then you didn't cover my platform. And that's un-American. That's anti-democratic. I have a right not to be defamed when I'm running for president. My life has been on the line as a whistleblower. I don't have Secret Service protection. My life is now on the line as a presidential candidate. To get on the California, to qualify to have my votes as a write-in candidate counted in California, for example, for the June 7th primary in California, I had to reveal my current residential address in North Carolina. Okay, so I put my campaign headquarters in a house here in North Carolina. So I'm a real candidate. I did the honest thing and the forthcoming thing with the American people in a tradition of presidential candor that goes all the way back to George Washington, right? I mean, it was Washington who supposedly said, at least generations of American school children were said that it was Washington who mouthed the famous words, "It was I, Father, I chopped down the cherry tree." And then we had another great president, Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president, who was known as Honest Abe because he was always striving to tell the truth. We've enshrined transparency in government in things like the Freedom of Information Act, okay? And that's what I've delivered in my 100 proposals. And yet, you basically caricatured my proposals, and you didn't reveal to your readers that unlike the 4 or 5 quote-unquote establishment candidates that you analyzed at length, I have a fully crafted, fully thought out, fully honest disclosure platform. I'm running as a figure in the truth movement and somebody who has already been recognized for years as a whistleblower. And so that's what I take objection. I take objection to the fact that in the very process of trying to be honest with American voters, with the voters, in the very process of putting my own personal and professional reputation on the line to reveal the truth to the American people, and then to distill it into a presidential platform, that didn't get told in your article. What the reader got told in your article was that I was some kind of kook who could be readily dismissed, or somebody who was saying things that were so controversial that I had no chance of getting elected. Well, I've done mainstream media, and the response has been off the charts. When I do Coast to Coast AM, the whole board lights up. I have one of the highest arbitrons in the history of the program. So I'm bringing real answers to real questions, many of which embody real, honest, well-thought-out proposals. And I felt that in your article, I was caricatured, and my proposals were caricatured. And also, according to the own conceit of the article that you arrived at as a journalist, which again, I think it was Geraldo Rivera who said that in journalism there is no objectivity because story selection itself is subjective, right? So you decided, or Gawker decided, to do a piece on, and I think it's a very interesting conceit as an article on your conceit. I think it's fair to say was, who are the most ET disclosure friendly candidates? How do they stack up? And you didn't report accurately about me because you wanted to caricature me and to some extent ridicule me, but notwithstanding the fact that I beat all of the others hands down in terms of being the quote-unquote UFO-friendly, or I would say ET disclosure-friendly candidate for Americans who are interested in that critical issue. And it's just not honest. It's not accurate, but beyond that, it's not honest because I've been a public figure now since 2004. I've been in the mainstream media for 7 years. I have these well-crafted, thought-out proposals. What has Trump been talking about? He gets up in front of audiences of people and talks about building a 30-foot wall for the 1,500-mile border that we share with Mexico. Does that sound at all sane to you? Where is his platform? Where is Ted Cruz's platform? The research of my campaign team, Andy 2016, revealed that of the 18 or 19 original mainstream or establishment Democrat or Republican candidates, namely those who were being regarded as viable because they had been members of the House, the Senate, or state governors, or very prominent business people like Trump and Fiorina, only one of them had published a platform, and that was Rubio of Florida, who's now out of the race. None of the others had published a platform. I published 100 proposals, 6 or 7 of them which happen to be directly germane to the conceit of your article, and I got so caricatured that I wasn't really reported about before having my name and candidacy placed before a cartoon of an octopus. That's not honest, Brad. That's not honest journalism.
You will get absolutely no argument from me on most all of your points. That's what this interview is about, right? Correcting that record.
Okay, that's fair. I respect you. You're a good writer, and like I said, now that I'm in my 50s, I don't want to sound too avuncular, but I was helped by a lot of brilliant people as a young man. I wrote for Jacques Cousteau. I had a friendship with Buckminster Fuller. I was a protege of Norman Cousins at UCLA. So I was helped by people whose biographies now appear in the Encyclopedia Britannica. So part of my career involves spending time with younger Americans and trying to make the kind of investment that some great Americans made in me, that me, humbly speaking, not as if I'm a great American, but that I can make in younger people who are striving for excellence. So I could tell that you are, and that's why I reached out to you, so that I can not be bitter and say, well, okay, Rhett Jones published a hit piece against me, but really try to communicate to you so that you can do the best possible work.
Well,
that was my motive.
Yeah, I don't know. We can talk about it further later, but the fact is that your term drive-by journalism isn't inaccurate, and that's just kind of the way things go. And the fact is I'm not going to say you weren't a casualty as far as a joke goes there, but all I would say is don't take it personally, and it's more about a joke of our system of not taking any candidate outside of the Democratic or Republican process seriously at all. That photo above wasn't necessarily to represent you. It was just an old Simpsons reference to a time where they did a episode where 2 aliens took over the election, and everyone found out they were aliens, and the town's upset that they're aliens, and and the aliens are well, what are you gonna do? It's a 2-party system, so they have to vote for one of the aliens, But
I may file a Supreme Court challenge against the state of California for requiring that they basically, and I guess maybe the Supreme Court would rule that it's a state prerogative, but on the California ballot, I just filed a form to have my votes in the California primary counted. This isn't as digressive as it seems. Let me explain. California requires that you file with a party in seeking the presidency, and that's not in Article 2. So, I mean, in other words, they are imposing a requirement that you also be affiliated with, I think it's 6 parties. It's like the Republicans, the Democrats, Peace and Freedom, the Green Party, the Libertarians, and one other, I don't know. And so that might be more of a legitimate political article for you if I did do that, if I did basically contest the fact that California is adding a condition to the presidential eligibility requirements stated in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5. But I know that we're locked into this Republican-Democratic, dialectic. But that doesn't mean that somebody who is qualified to run for, in my view, as a former journalist, that I don't think that, I know that you're Gawker.com, so I'm sure that it's quite legitimate for a political journal like Gawker to have a facetious tone. But I just objected to the fact that by not fitting into that formula of being, let's say, a Democratic senator from, some state, or a former member of the House, or present member of the House, or, a governor of a state, and so forth, that running as a citizen, that I didn't qualify, in the act of being covered, I didn't qualify for the legitimate reporting that the establishment candidates got, and then I was, to some extent, ridiculed or satirized or criticized unfairly. I just think that in an ostensibly democratic society, if somebody's going to be covered, it seems like I deserved as much verbiage as they got, and also, sort of the non-caricaturing tone that they got. Because look, the reason I might not be viable as a candidate is simply because I'm running as a write-in candidate, or I'm running as an independent. I mean, those factors constrain the ability of any American to run for and and be elected president. But in fact, my proposals are very sound, and I think they're very responsive to the actual situation that we find ourselves in. And let me just say in prescript for the rest of the interview, my proposals have been called by both political pundits and different individuals posting on Facebook. They've been called awesome, brilliant, unrivaled, genius in print, mind-blowing, and a life experience to read. So this again points up this breakout we have between the establishment view and the para-establishment view. Those 6 commendatory comments about my proposals came from the para-establishment, either political journal writers from sort of the greening of the country, but here, Gawker is kind of positioning itself as a satirical establishment publication, and the fact that I am a sane and intelligent citizen who's making sound public policy suggestions got totally lost. That's really what I'm referring to.
Yeah,
I know that you guys,
I do understand. I do.
Look at Hunter Thompson. I mean, some of the best political reporting in the country has been trenchantly satirical,
Absolutely.
And so I read that. I'm a political junkie, and I love satirical political content. I laugh out loud at it because I love the drama and also the comedy of American politics.
I don't resent
that.
I'm sorry. Let me just interrupt right there, just for one second. But definitely, let me tell you that, it pains me to, think that you felt like I was punching down, and that's not really what I intended to do. Which is why, let's get down to business, right? Let's cover these policies.
Okay, cool. Yeah, okay. So anyway, that's yeah. So enough said. It sounds like I understand where you're coming from, and so let's do it. Just fire away.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let me hit something that's not UFO related at first. Because I understand. I read through your 100 policies, and so is my editor. And we've talked about it, and there's a lot of stuff in there. So you're campaigning on the to use your title, defensive defense policy, right?
Yeah.
Which is I'm taking is similar to to use a dirty word, isolationism. But Only attack when attacked, kind of deal.
It's I would describe it as neo-isolationist.
Right.
Admittedly, avowedly, I believe that we are suffering from imperial overreach. We are stigmatizing our reputation around the world. We are violating the very Nuremberg principles that we helped frame, that we basically initiated, not during the trial of the lawyers and judges, but the Nazi high command. And that outlawed conspiracy to wage aggressive war, waging aggressive war, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. We've begun conspiring to wage aggressive war. And so in the last 25, 30 years, we've departed from American principle, which was neo-isolationist. We had the admonishment of President Washington in his farewell address to avoid entangling alliances, right? We had the Monroe Doctrine that basically we would come to the defense of countries that respected our borders and ask for our intervention. We are isolated geographically from the rest of the world, much of the rest of the world, just as a virtue of geography. We have become the policemen of the world. And even during the Vietnam era, Americans would say to themselves and to each other, well, we have a defensive defense policy. That's why we changed the name of the War Department to the Defense Department after World War II. We were signaling to the world that we would only use our phenomenal and totally admirable military might in defense of our country or its interests. But we've departed from that established doctrine. That's all I'm calling for in that proposal, is an awareness that we've departed from that doctrine and that we should once again adopt a defensive defense policy. So that doesn't mean, for example, if a foreign nation is... Sorry, go ahead. I cut you off, sorry.
Well, I'm sorry. How would this, like... A lot of these things we have to frame within, the national conversation. So, how is this going to relate to our conflict with ISIS?
Well, ISIS has committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. It committed a very heinous war crime when it burned to death the Jordanian pilot in a cage. It is a violation of the Geneva Convention and the Nuremberg principles to execute POWs, even by a firing squad or a guillotine or something that's relatively swift. And that poor pilot spent several minutes dying by being burned alive. They've also committed crimes against humanity because when you kill people, especially non-combatants, because of an indelible characteristic, their nationality, their race, their color, their religion, their sexual orientation, what party they belong to, you're committing genocide. Okay, so they were committing genocide by beheading Christians. Okay, in the same way that Saddam Hussein committed genocide by attacking the Kurds of northern Iraq as an ethnic group. So in the case of ISIS, a defensive defense policy that makes exceptions in the area of policing and preventing and also prosecuting what are called violations of norms use cogents, which are those principles that are so fundamental to our civilization that public international law recognizes that we have a right, every nation has a right to prohibit them. Things like genocide, slavery, torture, piracy on the high seas. We have a complete right, even if we're operating under a defensive defense policy, to prosecute a war against ISIS as a military organization because they're committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. We would have a right to do it unilaterally in conflict with one other country or military group or in an international coalition. Also, the Desert Storm, when an international coalition was organized to topple the regime, not Desert Storm, but the Iraq War, when an international coalition was raised to topple Saddam Hussein, that was a legitimate exercise of American military power under my proposal for the same reason. Saddam Hussein had violated all four elements of the Nuremberg principles. He had conspired to wage aggressive war, he had waged such war, and he had committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. So same thing with ISIS.
So just to be clear, like crimes against humanity count as crimes against the state.
No, crimes against humanity are prohibited under public international law, so that when any nation state or coalition of nation states goes to war against a nation state or a terrorist group that is committing crimes against humanity, it is a legitimate use of force. It basically satisfies the use of force doctrine. So in my proposal, I'm I'm essentially synthesizing the use of force doctrine by stating that even though we would adopt a defense policy that would be defensive in its orientation. In other words, its first principle would be that we would try to constrain our military conduct or military activity in the defense of the country and not to wage aggressive war. One of the primary exceptions to that abiding doctrine would be that it's legitimate to prevent and to also prosecute things like war crimes and crimes against humanity. So if a regime commits crimes against humanity, that country can be invaded and that regime toppled, like we toppled the regime of Saddam Hussein. If a terrorist group is doing it, same thing. It's legitimate under public international law for any country to punish a country and stop violations, to wage a military assault on another country or group to stop violations of norms, use, cogence. It's already framed in public international law as a legitimate use of force to do that. And I believe we should continue to do that. When we can make that case before the world community, and preferably in concert with partners, not unilaterally. We shouldn't be the policeman of the world. But if, for example, there's a regime, let's say like Libya, where Gaddafi was planning to print a gold-backed currency or begin accepting some other currency besides dollars for his oil sales, it's not a legitimate use of force to say, well, we have a national interest, therefore we can invade and topple the regime of Muammar Gaddafi. That was not a legitimate use of force under my policy. Our country wasn't going to be invaded or attacked, and Gaddafi and his regime were not clearly violating. They were not clearly committing either war crimes or crimes against humanity. There was one story that suggested that he was some kind of sexual creep and he had rape rooms where he was raping women. Well, that would be a crime against humanity, but it would be unclear whether that was a crime for which he could be assassinated or arrested,